other.
Either. Okay, so we're recording.
Okay.
All right, so you're going to be famous now, and lots of money before
Right.
you.
Not really. I mean, I've just lived my life. That's all. All I can say is just stuff happens.
Okay, so did you have any particular topic that you wanted to discuss? It sounds like you're a very fascinating person, but I want to make sure we go down a road that you feel comfortable talking about in the public. It could be anything.
I'm comfortable about everything. I mean, it's just my
Me
life.
too. Me too.
Like, what the hell? If I see something and I experience something, I tell my students. They think that I'm crazy. Well, that's their choice. We all have choices in life.
Right. Okay. Well, since you're open to talking about anything, I suppose I should ask, when did anything happen in your life first, which was unusual or interesting or paranormal, anything at all?
Okay, you're asking a question. So probably the most interesting thing that happened that I recall that got my attention was when I was probably around 3 years old, when I saw a dead person standing behind my neighbor. It was her husband who just passed away. She was crying. And I remember saying to her, Holly, why are you upset? He's standing behind you. And I was only a little tiny thing, tiny. So I've always been able to see stuff that other people don't see. And that was where I began to start seeing things. Then I suppose as a kid, things happened and I lived in Africa and then came back to England. But as a teenager...
Hold on before you go on. Okay, so let's go back just for a moment to the story you were just telling. Okay, yes. The guy was standing, you were standing behind your neighbor?
Our neighbor, and he just died and she was crying.
Okay, so she didn't know he was there,
no.
Right? Okay, did he,
I saw him.
Did you notice he was in a good mood, a bad mood, or anything?
Well, he was really horrible when he died. So I don't know what he died of because I was too small to really know. But I know he was horrible because he shouted at me when he was obviously must have died of sickness.
He wasn't.
So he had yelled at me. But when I saw him.
After he passed.
After it passed, I just saw him and I didn't know why she was crying. What was the big deal? Because I said, well, there he is. But she didn't see him.
Okay, so before you move on, so did he look solid? Did he look three-dimensional, two-dimensional? Was he see-through? Was he had he changed his demeanor from when you knew he was not happy alive?
The demeanor had changed from anger to quite placid, like concerned. So there was not that aspect of how I remembered him when I'd gone to the house, because she was our neighbor and I used to spend a lot of time there because I liked her.
Well, it sounds like death did a good deal, it helped him out.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not so bad over there.
It does sometimes.
I mean, do you think maybe he went to a place that was good for him and therefore that's what made his attitude?
I think when someone passes, just from the work I do, is that they lose that role that they've taken on of whatever they've decided they're going to do in this experience. So when they pass, all those negatives that they've taken on will disappear because they're spirit now. They're, gone back to the source in a way, not quite left the earth, because if there's unresolved stuff, they will hover. I mean, normally when someone dies, from my experience, they hover. And depending on the unresolved stuff, they might hover for a longer time, whatever.
Well, I'd heard from other people talking about people they had seen after they passed that people kind of keep the same attitude after they go over as they got here. And so I guess it can go either way.
Well, just from what I've seen is the anger aspect and the tension that they take on here tends to be left. It's interesting because my father, I was told, well, I found out he died 2 years ago, and it was interesting because it was a very contentious death, one that I was denied. And it was interesting because after he died, he hung around me for ages and ages and ages.
Your father?
Yeah, and he wouldn't go, and he would hang around. In fact, sometimes he does come through, but I'm not really worried. That's his, his scenario. It's not my issue. But when there are unresolved issues with somebody on this planet, when they have choices and they make choices that are not in alignment with their ascension, with for the good for mankind and
Yeah.
themselves, they make the wrong choice. They tend to become earthbound, and this is what leads me on to some of the paranormal things that I have come across in my life that present themselves, and I look at them and I go, oh, okay, so why are you here? You want to go? Let's send you on your way. So, and it's happened over many decades of experience, things that I've seen, and I think because I now teach Terame, but before I taught Terame, I taught Tui Reiki and Karuna, but it doesn't matter. But what I found in those systems was I was unable to release, I suppose, non-physical entities that just were a hassle. I've had chairs thrown at me. I've seen people convulse. I've had tongues, when a student will talk in tongues as if possessed. So I've seen all of that. Now it's not a problem. We can sort it. It's really not difficult. But what I'm saying is that up to that point, and what I teach now chased me. It kept following me. I couldn't get away from it. I originally found it in Natal in South Africa when I was living there. And at the time, a woman came up and said, here's a book, read it. This is what I'm learning. You need to do this. And I said, but I'm in corporate. I'm not interested. So this was 25 years ago?
Right.
And I looked at her and I said, no, what are you doing there? And I'm not interested. And it was very interesting because she was quite insistent. And I thought she was just an airhead. I thought, well, she's ungrounded. She's, one of these dreamy kind of, what do you call them? Alternative people. I shouldn't say that because now you'll look at me and think, shit, what have you become? But anyway, it doesn't matter. But what happened was about 6 years ago, a woman got into my husband's vehicle and because he's a taxi driver and used his services, and she then struck up a conversation and said, what does your wife do? And gave him her telephone number that was only temporary for 3 months in this area, in this village I was telling you about, where lots of fun things happen.
Right.
And it was just very interesting because I went to experience what she did and I didn't look back. I literally cut my stool in half. And actually it was really interesting because in fact, just as I was talking to you, one of my students who I just trained for level 2 in the Terame, he came to, I used to have a share and I was busy presenting to the students, I'm sorry, but I'm no longer been working with this particular style of healing. I'm making a change. Those who want to follow me are very welcome. Those who don't want to, well, you've all got to where you've got to. I'm sure you'll find your path. A lot of my students followed me, but what was really interesting was there was one in particular student who I was very close to. I really liked her. She was a great lady. I'm not going to give the name of her because it wouldn't be fair, but I was really fond of her. And all of a sudden, as I stood up, because I just received my level 3 initiation, because I had to convert, all of a sudden she started speaking as if it wasn't her, and really rude, really disrespectful, really insulting, and her eyes rolled back, the whites were her. I mean, I just thought, my God, okay.
That's what happened to my wife. Her eyes. That's what happened to my wife. She was sitting on the couch drinking wine, and her eyes rolled up on the top of her head. Then they turned black, and then they turned red, and they were going between those three over and over. And that was the beginning of her obsession one day. And I almost spent a couple years in prison because I chose to confine her to a space because I thought it was the safe thing to do because she was not in charge. Uh, she wasn't in control of her own body.
Yeah.
And I think what happened was I got pulled into a situation where I probably should have just left her. What she did was she stood up and turned to the off the couch and turned to the right and started to walk, and she just stood there and she was like frozen and not moving. And uh, I let her stand there for like forever, wondering what's going to happen. I knew that she wasn't in charge of her own body, but I didn't. It was kind of a new situation to me, and I didn't really know what was going to happen. So I just let her stand there frozen for the longest. And I won't go into the whole story because it's very long. But let's just say I almost spent a couple of years in prison because the police, of course, don't believe in possession. And when you say somebody's possessed, how do you prove it without video camera? I didn't have this on video. I wasn't recording at the time. I didn't have a smart camera. I got a camera now, but I didn't have it then. So it's none of it's on camera.
Yeah, well, I was explaining when I had the student, and what happened was I had a new Terame student with me, and it was just very interesting because he witnessed it and he started feeling the energy. He could feel the sense of what was taking over this one student of mine that I've been teaching for like 3 or 4 years. And he just looked and said to me at the end of it, "What was that all about?" And it's just very interesting. And what I've found, just from a teaching point of view, and this is not all the other experiences that I've had, which has got nothing to do with my healing, but it's just about things that I've seen, like UFOs and grey people and all that sort of stuff. But it's about really walking your path and not being fearful of the darkness.
Is there a way to get you and me on the screen at the same time?
I don't know.
You're not a Skype expert?
Now I'm there. I'm not a Skypey person. I don't use Skype. I've been using Zoom a bit, which I don't really like. Now you've got me there. And then the other thing I use when I'm talking to students is WhatsApp. I use that all the time. But you've got me there.
Okay, well, I'll just leave you on the screen since you're talking.
Okay.
All right, don't need me on the screen. I just thought that was somehow we could do where it go. I think it goes back and forth between whoever's talking ends up on the screen. It goes back and forth. I've seen that before, and I was trying to get that to work, but I don't know how to do it. I'm not a Skype person either. So what you talk about is fascinating, and I think your life is probably at least as interesting, if not more interesting than mine. So you mentioned the guy standing behind your neighbor.
Okay. Oh, when I was a kid, yeah, when I was very small. I mean, it was just interesting because I had remembered him, and well, I knew him as a very angry, nasty man. And as a 3-year-old, well, you've done hypnotherapy, so you should have some idea. But a 3-year-old is very open and isn't generally fearful at that stage. They haven't been sent to school where they have to be deprogrammed and told about all the horrible things in the world. And I just remember seeing him dead and thinking, oh, you're not angry and you're not horrible, so I wasn't afraid. But I couldn't understand why my neighbor was crying and why she was so upset, because there he was standing there.
You didn't know he was dead?
I didn't know he was dead. I just thought I was looking at him, and he was just nice.
So was he? I'll go back to that moment just for 1 second. You're saying he was 3-dimensional and solid?
Well, he looked like that to me, but I mean, as I said, I was knee-high to a grasshopper. So what I remember was just this very, very clear vision, and I've never forgotten it. It was just something that when you put it into file 13 and it gets put away, right, and then you suddenly remember it again. Just something. Well, that's what happened, and so that's all I remembered.
When I've seen visions,
and my mother wasn't with me. No one was with me. I was with the neighbor on my own because I used to go to her house quite often because I liked her. She was nice to me.
Well, the visions I've seen of people and stuff have all been two-dimensional. They were solid, but not no depth. So they might have been three-dimensional in one fashion, but mostly two-dimensional, and not so much depth. Like they're being projected on a screen. And I just wondered if you saw him as a fully three-dimensional object.
I think with what I saw, I think you to get that kind of information out of my brain now would be quite hard for me to do an absolutely exactly accurate situation. What I've seen subsequently, more recently in the last 5 or 6 years of darkness, yes, it was not three-dimensional, definitely not, but it was jagged, it was dark, it was acrid, you could feel it in the air.
Oh, something you saw recently?
I've entities, really dark stuff coming out of wells when I was training in this village nearby. When I 5 years ago with this woman that got into my husband's taxi.
Your voice is kind of coming and going. Is there any way is it possible that you could adjust your microphone slightly to where your voice stays?
If I turn it down a little bit, how's that?
That sounds good, but I don't know if it's because your head is closer or because the mic is moving.
No, I turned it down because sometimes if you turn it too high up, it gets blurry.
Well, the voice sounds perfect right now, as long as you keep it that low.
I just turned it down a little bit.
All right. Well, I guess maybe for a moment we could switch between dead people and. Okay, so you said you saw spirit stuff's coming out of a well.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you about that. There's a few things that I've really seen. I think I saw a flying saucer. Okay, that was in False Bay in South Africa. I've seen grey people in our house in Johannesburg. That was very interesting. And I would say, yeah, I would say, oh, really dark energies coming out of stagnant old well. And I don't know if was even water at the bottom of that well, but this village is a very interesting village. And this would have been around, I'm just trying to think the year, probably about 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. What was really interesting was that out of the well was the sort of jaggedness, but I was doing a conversion with this lady who was actually from Ireland, but she was literally here for 3 months. Now, the village that she rented this rather large house from is in a village where they ended up burning witches about 500 years ago. There were a lot of people who were killed, burnt.
What village?
Mayfield. You can Google it. Mayfield.
Mayfield. Okay.
The witches of Mayfield. And so a lot of people, possibly unnecessarily, were murdered. And
right.
So their souls would have. And what I did a house clearing for one of my students who lives in the village. And what it came to me was that if you're going to chop people's heads off or you're going to burn them to death and they don't have a restful death, you are going to have a lot of unsettled energies.
Sure.
Connected to that particular place. So if somebody comes in with, I was going to say, a light worker, of course, you're going to end up with pulling out dark energies that need transformation because they're going to want to be relieved and to follow the light. It makes absolute sense.
Sure.
So this well was possibly where bodies had been just chucked or disposed of because they wouldn't have had a proper burial because they wouldn't have bothered. They would have just chucked them.
Sure.
And so a lot of unresolved issues. And I'll tell you another thing that was very interesting, talking about wells and unresolved issues, was that I lived in Israel a long time ago with my husband, and I used to cycle around. I lived in a place called Ashkelon, which is the gateway to the Silk Route. So there was an ancient harbour that, was accessed from China going through across the land, of course, and then they would ship out the spices and the silks on the Mediterranean to Europe. But what was really interesting was that this castle, and you can check with National Geographic because they did an article on it around that time, actually. And I hadn't seen the article because obviously it got published, I think, after that event. But what was really interesting was that I used to ride, they had wells in this ancient castle, and I used to ride around it because it was a good place to go for a bike ride. And I always used to get the feeling that there were sort of lost energies in the well. And it used to always make me feel cold. There were a couple of wells there. And I didn't realize that that is where Herod chucked all the little baby boys that he killed. And
Herod? Really?
Chucked down these wells. So I was picking up their energy. So that also kind of made me realize that when I did my training 5 or so years ago, it was kind of like, well, I've done the well scenario before. So I was already open to that possibility and understood the concept. But when I got to England in 2003, somebody gave me a National Geographic magazine, and there was a whole article about Ashkelon Castle. And then, of course, I understood why I felt what I did. And it made absolute sense.
So, all right, what you mentioned two different well things where things were coming out of two different wells. Go back. I guess I would ask you to go back to the other well thing and try to describe exactly what you experienced as if you were experiencing it now, not hoping anything would come your way. But I mean, just saying, if the listener wanted to understand what you experienced with the other well, not the Israel well, but the first one you mentioned.
The one in the village that I experienced when I was training with them.
Did you see something, feel it?
Yes.
Describe exactly what you went through.
So what I would describe is we were sitting at the dining room table in the kitchen. So it was like a dining room table, but in the kitchen. It's a big kitchen, stone floor. The door was shut. We were in the house on our own. Husband was at work, so we were there. We were going through my manuals and checking out what I had to throw out, what was okay, etc. So she was basically helping me convert because I was already teaching and I needed to sort my stuff out. And all of a sudden, the handle on the kitchen door turned and the door opened. There's no one there.
Did it frighten you?
Well, I was trying to assess what I was feeling at the time. I felt cold, very cold.
Right.
Incredibly cold. I looked at the lady. The lady's name was Gillian. I looked at her. She looked at me. And I thought, what the hell? Because she's a healer. Yeah? A massive healer. And she doesn't work with darkness. So what on earth was she renting a dark house? They moved very quickly. They didn't stay there very long. But what happened was that we used Kabbalistic prayers. And she started at that stage, I didn't know all of this because obviously I hadn't been trained. And she used this particular prayer to clear it. And this energy literally, well, it was right standing by us, hovering around us, and I could feel it. It was horrible. She used this prayer, and this energy literally just flew out the kitchen, out of the door. And the most fascinating thing about it was that the front door was, I think she'd opened the front door. She went and opened the front door. But the interesting thing was that I actually saw this jagged energy walking across the kitchen window, but on the outside, as if it was leaving. Now, that particular Kabbalistic prayer is used to disperse dark energies, and it's very effective, really effective.
So, what did you see? The thing that was walking out, the leaving spirit, what did it look like to you?
Jagged. It wasn't a person. It was a non-physical energy it looked like a dark shard of like fragmented glass, or like, I wouldn't say like something from what do they call it, the Dark Riders, but it was jagged and dark.
Right.
you could just see that it was a really, I mean, it wasn't a person. It
Right.
wasn't a person. It was just a dark, jagged energy.
So,
And the feeling was one of coldness and fear.
so her prayer was effective.
Yeah, excellent. It just got it out. But there were more. And they were coming out of bloody well, excuse my French. And they were coming out.
How did you know they were coming out of the well?
Because there were more coming in.
But I mean, okay, so they're coming in the house, but how did you connect them coming in the house with coming from the well? That's the part
Well, because she had seen them as well beforehand. She'd been having a lot of problems there on her own. And husband was busy working and could go to, because he was a banker, so he'd go off and do his job. And apparently was causing her problems. But a bit later on, after she'd shunted they stopped coming out the well because there was more than one. The main one was that one when the door opened. But there was some more as well that came through, and she used the prayer. But all of a sudden, we were sitting again, and we had a cup of tea, and she was an artist, and she had a easel in the sunroom, and her easel got thrown across the room, and we had to go in and see what had happened, and it had been chucked right across the room. So what I'm saying to you is that essentially, I wouldn't say poltergeist. It's not really I mean, I've come across poltergeist. I don't like it. I don't do Ouija board and any of that stuff because it's too dark for me. But these energies were wanting attention. They wanted something. I think they wanted to be released. I think they were stuck.
how did they get connected to the well?
They would have probably been chucked there when they'd been killed. At
Oh,
point
so
of death.
so it was an assumption you made that's where they came from.
Well, yeah, I assume, and I know it's probably a bit of a wild thing, but from my experience of Ashkelon Castle, you know, bodies do get chucked down wells. So it's quite an easy, especially if you're not going to bury them. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay, so it's a common thing.
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, it's adding up, but a well is got water, and from my experience, water can be stagnant water, or where there has been water, tends to have quite a bad energy. And I'll tell you why I think this is because one of my students went to the woman that had a problem with me when I'd converted. She had, funnily enough, she built herself a treatment room in her house where there'd been a well. And she made the well a feature. And apparently my student went there to this particular so-called Reiki share, having been converted to the Terra May. And apparently he noticed that when he was there, the energies were there because he's obviously lighter, that apparently lights and stuff that started shaking, but he felt that there were things coming out of this where the well had been. Like the lights started flashing, and it was a little bit like, well, this was weird. And he reported it to me and said, do you know what we experienced? And I said, And I wasn't surprised because this woman, as I said, probably had picked something up. And I'm beginning to think that maybe, you know, with a well, she just picked this up. And obviously, you know, with what she did, she wasn't going to get rid of it. But I have a feeling about wells, and I always just think that stagnant energies seem to reside there.
So the other well that you mentioned, or wells that you mentioned around in Israel, around the castle, what exactly did you see or experience there?
I used to cycle around that on a daily basis, like my exercise thing at 5 o'clock, because it was cooler then and you could do it. But basically, I used to be drawn. There was like a tug. I can't explain it because obviously I work on my intuition. But when I used to go around there, I was always drawn there, and I used to have a rest, get off, have a look. And I was wondering why I was always being pulled to these. They had grids over the top of them.
Right.
And it was a funnel. So you couldn't get down there, but that was all it was. And there were a few of them. And it was only when I read the history in the National Geographic that it told me the history of that particular castle and what had happened, the history of that place with Herod.
But
So
when you were near the wells, did you just have a bad feeling, or did you actually see
yes,
something?
I didn't see anything. I just had bad feelings, and I used to think. I get readings. Like I sometimes I get words that come through, or I'll just understand something. You know, when you just have an absolute clairvoyant moment, and you know absolutely what's going on in a situation where no one's telling you anything. It was one of those moments, and I felt that a lot of people had died there. There was a lot of death.
So the kind of work you do, I guess we should probably go over it, just for clarity about what you do. You said you do Reiki, and you mentioned a couple.
I used to work. Well, when I say I used to work with Isui Reiki and Karuna Reiki, and then, as I said, this lady got into my vehicle, my husband's vehicle, and she converted me to Terramare Healing System. Now it's very different. It is Reiki, but I've actually gone to Sikkim, and I do the Akashic healing too. But basically, to explain it, is it's different in the fact that it's been upgraded, it's more grounded, and the other concept of the whole system that I work with now is about the removal of energies that don't are not fit for purpose. So as opposed to just a straight channel with all the rubbish that someone's carrying emotionally, mentally, psychologically, everything, in this particular system, we clear out energies. That means entities, it means beliefs, it's all about getting rid of rather than channeling in. We channel in later if it's necessary, but it's the emphasis is about removal.
And
that you pick up. So
and you have,
we're like fuzzy felt. We pick up everything. So if you are somebody who's walked around life and you've had lots of traumas, lots of this, lots of that, you've got a whole lot of stuff in your energy field. When the lower you feel and the more depressed you are, the more likely you are to attract dark energies that are lost.
sure. I think I got mine from smoking pot, but smoking marijuana.
Marijuana is typical. I don't like that stuff at all. And alcohol as well brings you to once your vibration is low, you are open to the darkness. Finished.
It's like ayahuasca.
Yeah, you can. Well,
It's like ayahuasca. People that do ayahuasca for 2 weeks, 10 days straight, become delirious. Ma'am, my name's Deborah Beaver. You have no idea what I went through with my husband. We went to a rainforest in Peru. I had contacted the U.S. Embassy, and they told me if he doesn't come out, we'll send agents down there to find him. And what they end up doing, they have a contract with those places, these so-called health healing centers, who administer this drug. A lot of people come out there very mentally deranged and damaged. They have a deal, an agreement, that those people are taken to a hospital. And then their passport is given to the U.S. Embassy office, and they contact a family member to come and get them because they're so impaired from this drug. My husband did it for 10 days. Trust me, ma'am, he was very impaired.
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, no, I don't.
You have no idea what I went through, lady. I got him out of jail. I went through all the steps, spent $10,000 to get everything cleared up. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. Everybody has baggage. I used to be a paralegal. I specialize in medical malpractice and also sexual abuse cases. I've seen a lot. So, mind you, my dear, what our world is very ugly sometimes. I dealt with a lot of ugliness. I walked away from a lot of jobs because of corruption. So, you have to understand the whole parameter. You might be told one side of the story. But what they do down in these rainforests, but National Geographic did a special on it about people disappearing, not coming out, because they're so impaired. I talked to the U.S. Embassy's office. They confirmed my suspicions. I cannot believe what I uncovered. But he came home, but he was not in good state of mind. Trust me, he was not.
No, well, funnily you're talking about this stuff. There's a place in this village where apparently they've been using it, and they made a joke about it, but it's, I don't know, it's like above our.
It's not a joke. It's very dangerous. I was warned by 2 different people. The shaman, all they want is your money. My husband paid $1,000 to 2 different shamans. All they do is blow his mind out in these so-called healing ceremonies. They go on in Arizona. 4 people died from heart attacks. Mike witnessed a woman dying down there. So this is insane. I warned him not to go. But you understand, people, everybody has influences. But you don't open up that door to take a drug you have nothing about.
Did you want to be on my show, Deborah?
No, I had to give this up because I'll never forget what I went through with you. I saved you from a very ugly situation.
Did you want to be interviewed on my show, Deborah?
I'm sorry, but you know what? I'll never forget what I went through. It took a lot of years out of my life. I went through it. I kept it quiet. And ma'am, you have no idea. My mother committed suicide. And I had to go through that. There was another experience I will never want to go through. So I've kept my peace. And I did the right thing. And I was there for him. But I warned him, don't ever do that again.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the info.
Yeah. So, where were we at?
We were talking about the wells, and I was discussing about what it looked like in the house, and about how it was jagged, and how it was just. I think the reason I saw the actual energy, the chi, was just because it's a way of a manifestation of presence. I mean, I don't have to see something to know that there's something there. Do you know what I mean? If I can sense something, I've seen stuff. Like I've had a chair chucked at me. I had a treatment bed. There was a woman that I healed. Actually, it was in this village. And she seriously, she suffered from mental health issues and was on medication. And the bed.
No, I have to interrupt. I have to finish this. I have to end it with this.
Deborah.
No, Michael. I know what you say about me.
On the show?
You know what?
Come on,
he ended up getting arrested, man, for domestic violence. I was beaten so badly. Okay? My neighbors called the police. 2 other neighbors said, your husband needs mental health treatment. And so did the police officers. He was sent to a state hospital for mental examination for what he did to me. Because of this drug and his so-called attachments. It got way out of control. Nearly cost me my life. But you know what? I got strong enough to deal with it. I took care of him legally. I forgave him. But don't even go there with me, lady. I've been in a trial in the courtroom many times, defending women with lawyers that are very good. Or with a lot of medical expert witnesses, psychiatrists, psychologists.
Do you want to be on each of my shows?
I've been through a lot of stuff.
You could be on each of my shows, dude.
And I survived. And I always prevail. But I do not like somebody slandering behind my back, especially when I got photographs of my face and what he did to me. I sent it to all of his relatives and my brothers. I said, don't you ever touch me again.
You can sit next to me when I'm on show.
No, you need to reveal the truth, Michael.
I have.
Oh, right. I don't think so.
She's still under denial. She doesn't believe she was ever obsessed.
Okay. All right.
You understand what I'm saying, right? She doesn't believe that she ever got obsessed. That day she thinks I went crazy and something happened to me, and she doesn't believe that event ever actually happened. So, anyway, enough about me. Where were we? Okay, so you were talking about your style of healing.
Yeah, this type of healing I work with is basically a lot of the emphasis is about the removal of energies that don't serve purpose. So, like for instance, we use the pendulum. We use aspects of prayers that release souls because of the understanding of the fact that for us as human beings, or for souls that come to the earth, the whole experience is about your ascension. So we come to this planet to die, but it's how we live our lives and the choices we make and what we do. So you become conscious of all your choices in life rather than going around in a haze. Now, most people in this sort of first world scenario, they tend to want to escape. That's what's happening an awful lot. Is you've got the drugs and you've got the alcohol and you've got the dysfunctionalities and all of that, and it has an impact on the vibration, because the higher your vibration, the less attractive you are to anything that's dark. So if you're vibrating at a really light level, you are going to be far more protected from any dark experience. They can literally, the darkness will just walk past you because they won't be able to hold on to you. But the thing is that you've got to be grounded. So the emphasis of what I work with now is about grounding and the balance of the energies of the yin and the yang. Very important. And I think what happened with the Asui system was that so much stuff was chopped out, removed, changed, altered, that eventually you couldn't get anything out of it. It probably was fairly good in its heyday when it first started, but I think in the 100 years that it's sort of been hanging around, or it's a bit more than 100 years actually now, it's been changed so much that it's not able to really deliver. And that's just from what I was working with and teaching. And I just came to that conclusion, and that's why I converted to what I do now, because I know that I can get a result, and that's what it's about. Things that I can do now, I could never have done before. So yeah, it's just interesting. So it's about like emotional clearing and stuff like that. If you are you familiar with it, Isui Reiki?
Well, I'm familiar with subtle energy, not that particular.
Okay,
Like,
so well, if you're not, then you probably won't get it. But essentially, in Isui Reiki, it's about channeling. So people will take their hands and channel universal energy.
right.
But the problem with that is that if someone's carrying low-grade energies there, for one, you're not going to get very effective. It's like almost like, if I can explain it, it's like painting your nails, which you probably wouldn't do, and leaving the old coat on. You're not going to get a very good result, are you?
Right.
So you have to take all the old stuff off before you put a nice new coat on. So that's kind of the idea.
So you mentioned earlier about aliens. What all have you seen?
Okay, I can explain about that one. Well, that's happened twice in my life. The first time was about 1982. I was working at the Newlands Hotel in Cape Town. And one night I was on the shift. I'd finished at 10 o'clock, and I used to drive home to Bishop. And I got to False Bay, and along False Bay from Muizenberg to Bishop, there's a train line. And I got to about Cork Bay. I think it was Cork Bay, St. James's, and I noticed. And I mean, I was tired, but, totally awake and with my faculties, etc. And I'm driving, and I wasn't very old then. I was, 21? And all of a sudden, I literally saw what I call a flying saucer. Okay? It was basically lying. It was quite big. It wasn't a small little whatever. So it was dome-shaped with lights that were coming underneath it. And it was literally, if I can say, hovering over the sea. Probably about, probably about 200 meters away from the edge of the sea, from the land side, but where the railway line runs round, and then it goes from Cork Bay, it goes to Clovelly, it goes to Bishop, which is the station that I would have caught if I had a train, and then it goes round to Simonstown. And this particular flying saucer literally just hovered all the way along the front up as far as it got to Clovelly, which is where the sea then coming to Bishop Bay, and then it spun off behind what we call Elsie's Peak, which was really the mountain behind where we were living, because I lived with my aunt. And then I saw it, once it got to Elsie's Peak, it literally went off in the direction of Simonstown. I must have watched it for about, I don't know, a good 10 minutes. Good 10 minutes. I was popped up, watched it, because I was intrigued. You know, it's not every day you see a peculiar looking thing like that.
How big do you think it was? How big do you think it was? How big do you think it was?
How big? Well, I would say, actually, probably the size of this room, maybe. Yeah, it was. It's difficult to say, but it wasn't so small. I mean, it was rounded, but like domed. I just remember the lights, because the lights were shining on the sea as it was hovering. That's how it moved. It moved as in a hover, and then it shot. So one moment it would go and then quickly speed up again. So it wasn't flying like an airplane or what we're normally used to. It was definitely got my attention. How big was it? It's difficult to explain how big it is.
When you say it wasn't flying like an airplane, what do you mean it wasn't flying like an airplane?
Well, an airplane flies very differently. It goes, wee. This was hovering. This is like a hoverboat, like a hovercraft, sort of like a hovercraft, but not on the sea. It was above the sea. So it was flying in the air, going around. But what happened was, the following morning, I phoned my cousin's father. He's a professor at the observatory. His name was Professor Feast, Michael Feast. He's now gone. He passed away a few years ago now. And I phoned him and I said, Michael, Victoria here, could you tell me, this is what I saw last night home from work. Is this common? And he laughed and said, actually, they're reported quite frequently. So I thought, well, I'll rest my case. Okay, fair enough. So that was like quite interesting, because obviously he was one of the top guys at the observatory, and obviously did lots of things with paranormal, with stars and observatory. I first knew him as a small kid when he was in Pretoria, but they then moved down to the observatory in Cape Town. So he was, not just your average person who was interested. He was a professor and worked and did a lot of top stuff for South Africa in his field.
So he didn't have any problems with it. He thought.
No, he just said they reported all the time. So I thought, okay, cool, that's fine.
You think maybe he had his own experiences?
Probably. I mean, he's dead now, so I wouldn't know. But he I remember in his obituary, they said he was like kind of very high up in his field. But he just basically confirmed to me that, what I was saying to him I'd seen was not unusual at all.
So what else did you see? What else have you seen with aliens?
A few years later, well, quite a lot of time later, my husband built a house in Hurlingham Manor in Johannesburg. And in 90 we moved in, so this must have been around 1991, probably, maybe about a year after, because I remember that the garden still wasn't that established. And in the middle of the night, my husband didn't want to put burglar bars in the house. In South Africa, everything's burgled, yeah? You're armed and you're burgled and electrified. We didn't have electric fences and we didn't have burglar bars, so you can imagine. So I was always kind of having my one eye open just to make sure that we could sleep okay without having a break-in. Anyway, one night I woke up. It must have been in the early hours of the morning. And to be honest with you, I felt like I was awake, but I wasn't awake. Does that sound normal? I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't move. So I was awake, but I couldn't move.
It sounds like you were half asleep and half awake.
Kind of, but I couldn't move. But
were you
when I was
just coming out of
awake,
sleep? Were you just coming out of sleep?
Yeah, well, something made me wake up. So I was awake, but I wasn't awake. But what I noticed was that I was sort of sitting up in the bed, but not able to move. Boys were sound asleep.
You were having my wife was talking about this just the other day. You were having um, sleep paralysis type
It
experience.
was like you were paralyzed. But the reason I was paralyzed was because these people were in our room and I couldn't move. And all I felt, and to explain it, was that I was being read. Now,
Okay.
I felt like they were reading me. They didn't harm us. There was one, I remember that because it bent as it came over through the window. And there must have been about 5 of them. They weren't very tall, 3 foot around there.
Describe them.
Grey, horrible looking whatevers. But
What do you call them? What type of alien?
I call them greys. That's my.
So they were a gray. With big heads?
They were greys, and I'd say there were about probably 5 in the room, of what I remember counting.
Short, tall, medium? How tall were they?
About 3 foot. It's not very tall.
3 foot's pretty short.
Yeah,
So
tiny. They weren't big. They were small. They weren't tall human.
They-
They were smaller than us.
do they look like you've seen Willie Strieber's book, Communion, his book? Communion?
Sorry?
Have you seen Willie Strieber's book, Communion?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
This is
so
what I saw, but I was frozen, and I just remember Boys was asleep, so he wasn't even awake. He didn't know what was going on. I couldn't move.
right.
I just remember being frozen, and that was the thing, and I could just watch. But I'll never forget the fact, I felt like I was being read. You know, when you go through a barcode,
Right.
they didn't harm us. They didn't do anything. They just literally read me. And then they left through the window.
How long were they there?
You're going to ask me, maybe 15 minutes, not that long.
And all they did was read you, and that's it.
Yeah, they read us and they went.
Did they walk around while they were reading you, or what did they do else besides reading?
They were watching us. I wouldn't say they were walking around as such. They were watching us, and our bedroom was huge. In South Africa, for some reason, my husband decided to build an enormous room, and we had no furniture in it except a bed. So we had this huge room, which was literally devoid of any furniture, which is really smart of him, but anyway, never mind. And there were these, as I said, I counted 5, and I couldn't. It was just interesting because it was like I was observing what was going on, but I couldn't do anything. I was literally just being held, frozen.
Can you describe? Did they have mouths or noses, or what their eyes look like? How big was their head? Is there anything you can describe about them in general?
The nearest I can say is when I've seen pictures and photographs of grey people. They kind of had faces, but not like a human face. Definitely not human.
Did they have the wraparound eyes?
Wrap around.
You know, where the eyes go kind of around the side of the head, sort of.
Probably. I mean, they didn't have eyes. They didn't. All I just remember was that their faces were definitely not human.
Right.
They didn't have human features at all.
Did they have
they had eyes. I remember they had eyes, but it wasn't human eyes.
Did they have color, skin?
I would say the skin, what I remember, was kind of, if I can say, murky. It was like a grayish, sort of murky color. Like, I was going to say, when you go in the bath and you leave something soaking in the bath like a wrinkled chicken. And I don't mean to say they were like chickens, because I'm sure they'd have been very upset with me. But, when you leave I was going to say put a dead body in a bath and leave it to soak. Looked a bit like that.
Pale, kind of pale.
Yeah, very pale, very pale.
So were they more white than gray?
No.
Gray, still gray.
Gray.
Yeah.
Not white.
And they were just there checking you guys out.
I just think they were reading us, checking us out, and they buggered off. It was interesting because where my husband built the house, there were very strong power lines along that stretch, because the power lines, the electrical lines, the grid of that house was horrific. I started developing terrible headaches And in fact, when we sold that house and we moved, my headache stopped. So there was a very strong electrical current there. And the other thing that was interesting was that that house was built on a bed of amethyst, which was also very interesting. And I remember my stepson used to pick up great lumps of amethyst in the garden when he was playing there. So energetically, I was going to say that that was quite interesting, what we were living on, you know.
Amethyst and electricity.
Yeah. Yeah, you come in from playing in the garden, another lump of amethyst, you know. I mean, in this country, people like buying it, but there
What color is amethyst?
Amethyst, purple.
Oh, it's purple. Okay. Well, I kind of thought you were talking about purple, but I wasn't. I don't know. I don't know stones, so.
Oh, okay.
I didn't.
Well, amethyst is a fairly common one.
So what else alien have you seen? Anything?
I think those were the two that I've seen mostly. Was that experience, the UFO.
Oh, the grays in your house,
and the
one UFO, one spaceship. Do you think they had any connection to each other? Or it was totally just separate.
No, I don't think so. But what I did do is I met a woman when I lived in Natal in 95, 96. We moved to Natal. I met a woman. I don't think I've got the book here anymore. But her sister had a relationship. This woman who was a hypnotherapist, by the way, she tried to hypnotize me and I ended up going out of my body. It was really weird. But anyway.
Did you?
Yeah.
What's that?
It was really interesting. I ended up burning my face. It was kind of interesting. I don't quite know where I went, but it was really interesting. But anyway, she was a hypnotherapist. She was an alcoholic. She was very unhappily married to her husband. And her sister lived in Natal and her sister was very good friends with my neighbor who now lives in Scotland. But that's not the point. The point was that her sister knew the woman who had been having a relationship with this man from another planet. And I'm trying to think what the hell, because I used to have a book somewhere on it. But I'm trying to think where it was.
Your friend had a relationship with an alien?
This woman had a relationship with an alien. It was actually, there's a woman in the Drakensberg who, and I'm going to ask, I'll have to ask Jason because he'll remember it because he lives in Scotland now. But her sister, the hypnotherapist sister, knew this woman who'd had a relationship and she'd had a child with this guy. And he'd gone back to his planet, which I don't know if it was the Pleiades. I don't know where he was from.
So you don't know what kind of alien he was? Did you ever see him or anything?
No, I never met him. Nothing. It wasn't. I never met him. It was just through connections,
right?
And it was kind of just interesting in a way that we had these experiences. But yeah, I mean, Natal's quite an interesting place. I would have to look it up because it's not something I'm actually I had a book on my bookshelf.
But you're trying to get to tell me something about an alien, right? Was there something? Are you just talking about the lady who had the relationship with the alien, or was there something else in there that you?
No. I'm just saying as I said, this hypnotherapist had a sister who was friends with this woman who'd had her sister had a friend who'd had a relationship with a man from another planet, and they'd had a child. And the child actually had to then left the planet when he grew up or something. He left. But there's a woman. You'd have to look it up in the Drakensberg in South Africa because that it has been, what's the word? Dialogued. Take a note. They have written about it.
Okay.
About it, and I'm just trying to think what the hell her name was. I mean, now you're talking. I haven't really thought about this one for about more than 20 years, to be honest. It was in about 96, 97 that I had these, meetings when I was living there. So you're going to ask me to try and remember it. And there were so many things going on in my life at that particular moment that, ask me. I think her name was Elizabeth Clara. That's right. Her name was Elizabeth Clara.
Ah, yes, I know her. I know of her. Yes.
And she had a relationship with a man called, what's his name? Beginning with an E, I think. Enoch or well, you have to. I'm sure if you Googled it, you'd find it. And in fact, if I Googled it, I probably would find it.
I'm familiar with Elizabeth Clare.
Yes, that was her.
I've heard of.
Okay, well, she had this relationship with Aaron, or I don't know. I just was going to look. Elizabeth.
Tell us about your out of body when you got hypnotized.
Oh, I just left my body. I don't like hypnotherapy myself, personally.
You don't?
I've been hypnotized twice. Well, they tried to hypnotize me, and it's not something I really like. And it reminds me of, if you've ever had marijuana, that altered state of whatever. I hate it, so I prefer not to get involved in it. But when this lady hypnotized me, I left my body, and I felt my whole face on the one side was like really hot, as if I was kind of moving in the sun and I was burning myself. It was just very interesting.
Where did you go when you went out of your body?
Into the universe, really. I was kind of like flying past the sun. So it was like the sun, and there was this heat. So it was just extraordinary. And I don't know really what it was about. And I can't even know why. I can't remember why she wanted to hypnotize me, because she was a hypnotherapist. But she ran quite a nice bed and breakfast there. So
you went past the sun. Where else did you go when you were flying?
I remember the sun from it, to be honest. That's all I remembered, was go the sun, and my face felt so hot. And when she actually brought me back, my face was really hot on the one side. But it was kind of an interesting experience.
So okay, as a healer, you help people remove energies, right? Correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And do you have any experiences with removing attaching spirits that are worthy, that come to mind, that are unusual or different or noteworthy? Or, if you get old and senile, is there an experience that you remember that what stands out along those lines?
I think what was really interesting was that, well, I've had a few interesting ones, really, but I remember that I had an interesting experience about 4 years ago. Was it 4? Probably, yeah, 4 years ago. A student of mine, I was teaching 2 ladies, and the one lady has a drinking problem. So she's got an energy system that's probably compromised.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did an initiation on the 2 ladies, but when I came to her and I did the initiation, she started shaking. And then she started almost talking through her mouth, but in a very insulting way. And I thought, what the hell is this? And then I realized that she had something on her. And
right.
It didn't like the initiation, because obviously it couldn't stay there.
Right.
And because of my training in that house with the well, I knew what to do. And the other student was very calm. For a young woman in her mid-30s, she was incredibly calm. She just sat and watched. The average student would have screamed and probably run down the street and thought she'd, freaked out. Anyway, she sat and watched, and we sorted out the problem. But what was really interesting was, the beginning of this year, this student who'd watched me do all of this was at a school funder, school fundraiser, and they were doing treatments. And there was a woman that had booked in with her. And what happened was, the very same issue that had happened when I'd done an initiation occurred with a particular woman that had signed up. But this was not an ideal setting, because this was in a school hall with lots of other people. And this woman was kicking off, shaking and shouting and doing all sorts of things, yeah, and rolling back and whatever. And apparently, this student of mine called Emma, she did a wonderful job, sorted problem, and then said to the woman, you need to come and see me at my house. You need to sort this out 100%. So it was really interesting. So before we had this stupid lockdown for the silly virus that they've had recently, I had some students round in the evening, and I invited this student of mine, Emma, to come and tell the new level 2s, she's now a level 3, her experience of her training and her experience of what had happened at the fundraiser at the beginning of this year. Because I think it's very important for people to become aware of when they come across irregularities, that it's not time to run away and get frightened, but that you can sort it. So it was interesting.
So how many people would you say that you've helped remove attachments that have that you knew without any doubt they had attachments, where it was very obvious like that?
Most people do. Most.
I know, but I mean, how many times have you come across somebody personally where you were dealing with it in a healing setting and it became very obvious, as opposed to just the average person who has them?
Well, the very obvious one was the lady, as I said, when I had a Reiki circle and I was just doing a presentation and saying, look, I'm closing the school down as it knows. I'm going to do a conversion. And I said that student started mouthing off, behaving ridiculously. Her eyeballs like rolled back. She became incredibly offensive and argumentative and difficult. I mean, that is not her at all. And I recognized those characteristics immediately, and the energy felt totally different too. So how many? Oh my gosh.
Well, I'm just talking ballpark, 5.
Yeah, I mean, ballpoint of real big one. I mean, the ones that are probably the most memorable, I can probably think of maybe 10 really big ones, but generally speaking, there are lots of other ones that also come through, if that makes sense.
And how many of all those people that you've experienced, that you've encountered, who had, that you know without any doubt they had attachments taking over, major problems, how many of those do you think got full healings where they were removed, where they totally were healed completely and those attachments were fully removed and fully resolved? Do you know how many of those that were?
Well, the ones that I've done, I know were sorted. But now, I'm going to say something here. If somebody doesn't change their ways and they perpetuate the lifestyle that they have been doing, then they can present themselves as a nice host. So it's their responsibility completely as to whether they want to stay clean or whether they want to foul up their energy circuit again so that they become a host. It's their choice. So they have to take responsibility for their own life. Do you know what I'm saying? So say somebody's a drinker and
I know exactly what you're saying.
Get rid of it. It's their bloody choice. If they want to sit and drink and get pissed, then it's going to happen again until they wise up. So I don't take responsibility for that. They've got to take responsibility. And that's why I say, when someone comes for a healing treatment and I talk to them at the end of it, and I do the evaluation at the beginning and at the end, I always say to them, right, what at the beginning are we trying to attain? What do you want to achieve at this for this treatment? Yeah. At the end of it, I say to them, right, how are you feeling? Let's get some adjectives into this, because they need to take responsibility for what they're feeling. And they normally say, well, they feel grounded, they feel really relaxed. One lady last week, she loved the colors and she thought this was amazing and she feels so good. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't matter what they're thinking, but it's about recognizing. I think people have to recognize that there's been a shift. And at the end of the day, it depends. Like tomorrow, I've got someone coming to me, childhood trauma. This is going to be interesting. And he's really ill, but I'm not surprised because of what he's experienced in his life. He's in his mid-70s. I haven't met him yet, but I know what I'm going to be dealing with. And so what we have to do is we have to work through all the layers. And it's not that we can't remove the energy. Once you've cleared someone up and you've grounded them and you bring in, I was going to say the ascended masters, because that's really who I work with, they're no longer very attractive. So whoever's clinging on and feeding off their energy field has to go. But as long as, for as long as they perpetuate that particular mindset, lifestyle, choice, yeah, they'll pick back up again. That sounds quite harsh.
No, it sounds normal.
But that's the way it is. So to me, I can do a lot more when I teach somebody than what I do when I'm treating them, because treating is only, you know, an hour, hour and a half, depending, unless they book in. Well, this guy's booked in some extra time. But what I'm saying to you is that you have to reprogram them. You've got to educate them. You've got to, you know, explain, show them, tell them, you know, this is what you're doing or not doing. And the other thing I'm going to say is if they're in a bad relationship, so if there's if you're in a bad, I was going to say cancerous relationship, which is one way of describing it, but if you're in a dysfunctional relationship where there's disharmony in the area, yeah, in the energies,
Yes.
this will also bring in entities that would feed off that situation.
Yeah, I got it. I understand.
So if you were sitting and meditating every day of your life and you were just, I don't know, pottering around and you never did anything, you never raised your blood pressure, yeah, you never had crosswords, you're always calm and placid, the likelihood of you picking up an entity is very, very remote.
So you kind of agree that most people have attaching spirits?
A lot of people, yeah, I think so. And also, if they're not grounded, if there's somebody who is not grounded, as in really grounded, and I'm not just talking about, well, you know, they're standing up on their feet, but I'm talking about that they are connected to the earth and they're not airheads. If somebody is an airhead, you know what I'm talking about by an airhead.
Not
Dreamy, sort of, oh well, you know, that kind of person. Yeah.
maybe I understand.
An airhead. Well, I suppose it's my South African terminology. An airhead is somebody who's not very practical, who's not very present, who's not sorted out financially, doesn't take responsibility for their life, is all over the bloody show, never punctual, always late, just can't get their shit sorted, essentially. Very ungrounded.
Yeah, I know somebody like that.
Am I making sense to you? So those sort of people are more susceptible to entity attachments or parasite attachments.
Well, I think my wife, who's still in denial about her attachments.
I mean, you can get rid of them, but you'd have to. They're easy to get rid of.
On her 14th birthday, she had a girlfriend come over with a Ouija board, and they played with it all day. And they played with it all day, and I think that's what started her problem. I had her in a trance maybe 13 years ago, and I was talking to a voice inside of her, and I said, I had an intuition that there was something strange about this voice, and I said, is this the higher self? And it said no. I said, is this the conscious mind? It said no. I said, is this the subconscious mind? It said no. I said, who is this? And I got no response. And I said, how many of there are you? It said, we are legion. And so that's where, and I kind of blew that off and didn't really do anything about it, didn't pursue it, didn't think about it much for many years. And, but, you know, one night or one afternoon, what I told you before happened, where she got kind of taken over. And she still doesn't believe that event happened. So until she recognizes her own issues, she's not going to be able to deal with them. I know I have problems of my own because just because of the nature of what happened with me and smoking pot and all that good stuff. I don't need to go through all my stuff because this is interviewing you, but you kind of get an idea. I have one that sits on my head and one that sits on my back, and my wife has a legion, and she goes dark very easily, as you must have felt that energy when she was speaking earlier.
Yeah, I could feel it. Yeah, and it's almost like when you do something that's progressing or tackling it, that they come in and they don't really want the status quo to be changed. And that's what you need to start recognizing, because they're fearful. Actually, they don't want to be shunted, but actually they do need to be shunted. They need to go to the light. I don't like darkness, and I don't work with it. And if you can, I don't know, I suppose I've been to many holy places in my life, and I believe that there are some amazing energies in this world. And I think that a lot of the ancient texts from the Bible, and I'm not a religious person at all, but there's a lot of power in the ancient texts. If that makes sense.
Well, Victoria Gosher.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to? I figure we've talked about pretty much everything.
I think we have. I think we've covered everything, actually. I don't think we've left anything out. I think I mentioned some things like, I've had beds flying at me in bits and pieces, but those are little things. I mean, those are just, when I say little things, they're attachments that are objecting. But I think essentially with what I've come across, that when people say there are things like paranormal stuff that's, I remember doing Ouija board. I don't do it. I will never do it again. I'm going to say I was 11 years old when I did the Ouija board in Johannesburg. And I remember feeding the spirit with fruit, cutting it into immaculate squares. And when we came back, there was this acrid smell, and pieces of the fruit had disappeared. We were all kids, my cousins and I. And this thing flew off, and I remember it was a Waterford crystal whiskey glass that got smashed. My mother was furious, of course, but I never forget the smell. And in fact, that put me off it for life. And I have never, ever done Ouija board ever since that day. And I would never touch it ever, ever. Because I think it opens up a vortex of something that's very dark.
But you don't think you were worse for wear yourself from that event?
The Ouija board, no, I think I needed to experience it so that I knew what it was, which I did. I was fine, not a problem. But I realized that it was something that you don't play with.
And so you're teaching what style of healing now?
Terame. So I teach Terame, the Reiki, and the Sikkim.
And you have healing sessions with people?
Yep, I do healing sessions. I do virtual, thanks to COVID. But actually, the one good thing about COVID, and I'll be honest with you, is that I actually had to transform some kind of idea of how could we do treatments if we're in lockdown. So I spent March trying to sort something out, and it's been amazing. It's been truly amazing. And the only reason I did it was because my practitioners came to me crying, saying, how do we continue working? So I thought, okay, let's see. It's not like just sending distant healing. This is a full-on virtual treatment, if you understand what I'm saying. So
no, I don't, but you can, this is your chance to advertise to get more.
Well, just what I've been working on now is just about working with energy, connecting up. I've been working really with WhatsApp and FaceTime's right. I haven't really worked with the Zoom because unless you use I did use one person's Zoom account because he's a public speaker for the bank. So he obviously has his own account. But the Zoom thing normally only lasts for 4 minutes, which actually isn't long enough, and I don't want to be cut off. Although actually we've learned through some business networking that actually you can reconnect, but in the middle of a treatment you don't want to do that. So that's why I don't bother with Zoom.
So what have you developed with the
treatment? So what I basically do is the client will fill in their docs, they'll email them back to me, and we will then connect at an agreed time. And literally I work from my treatment room, and they will be in either their bedroom. Most people are either in their bedroom or their lounge or even their study in a comfortable chair, and I strip them out. I do a whole lot of techniques on them, give them a little pamper, and they all fall asleep. And then I give them the wake-up call. I go down to the kitchen, get the saucepans, wake them up. I have to wake them up. Obviously, you know, it's your responsibility as a therapist to not leave your client in an altered state of mind.
How many, since you don't do hypnotherapy, what exactly do you do to get them to go out?
I ground them. I use the Reiki tools to bring them back, and I call upon various different energies to also bring them back. And because it's not difficult. And then I do some breathing techniques as well. Get them to breathe, get them to put the roots into their ground. Because I remember back in South Africa, I learned the hard way. A client of mine said, I'm very grounded. And she got into her Pajero and literally reversed into a brick wall. So I learned the hard way. You don't listen to what your client tells you. You make sure they're grounded.
So how many over the web sessions have you had so far?
How many? Oh, well, that's all I did in May. April, May, and June, I only did virtual. And I've worked with COVID. That was interesting.
How many sessions would you say you've done ballpark so far over the web?
35.
Wow, that's quite a few.
Yeah.
And it works just fine?
Yeah. And my students as well.
And it works just like you're there?
The clinic where I was teaching, that's all she's done. She's actually done more, but I was doing teaching as well, you see. So my problem is that I have to balance between treatments and teaching. And so when I say I did probably 35 treatments, yes, because the rest of it I've been teaching.
So how do people pay you for your service?
Either PayPal, backs.
PayPal or what?
Or backs, bank transfer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And you have a website?
Yes.
Which is?
yourhandscanheal.co.uk.
yourhandscanheal.co.uk.
But don't forget the 3 W's at the beginning. www.yourhandscanheal.co.uk.
Okay, well, is there anything else you want to say to the audience before we end our session? Our meeting?
Not really. I think I've given you an overall view of what I work with and what I've experienced. I mean, you know, as a child, I used to get premonitions, car accidents and things, and they always used to turn out. So that was always interesting. I've always been psychic. That I can just tell you. I always know when something's going to happen, and it's not always good things, to be honest. They're not things that I look for. I just know them. I get a hunch. But generally, my hunches now seem to work out. I don't fight them. I just roll with it. I was a bit concerned about connecting with you, and then something said, yeah, there's going to be an issue, but actually, just chill out, it'll be fine. And actually we connected, so it was okay.
So what kind of issue did you believe there was going to be?
I just think it was a connecting up. The connecting up was going to be a hiccup, and it was just, you know, it wasn't how I had visualized it, but I just went with my gut and thought, well, okay, whatever. And whatever turned out okay. So that's why I don't get like the point where, oh God, you know, this is awful, this is going to work out, what happened? I don't do that anymore. I just kind of think, okay, it's a problem, but you know, let's see something will happen. And we connected. Fine.
So is there anything you've learned about the like the other side that you got out of your body once?
Yeah. Well, I would say a couple of things that was interesting. I think when my father died, because I wasn't told he'd died, and it was rather a tacky death, I had a premonition about 3 years ago, and more than that, actually, probably 5. I said to my husband, my father is going to die of these things. And I gave them kind of in an order, which weren't nice. And I said it in quite an angry state. He's going to have a heart attack. He's going to have a stroke. He's going to have prostate cancer. And I think I said a few other ones. Anyway, apparently, when he died of all those things. But what was very interesting was that particular time when he died, which was 2 years ago, literally around this time, I just found out. So I was pretty angry with him. But I was sitting at the table in the garden with a student who's a psychic. And I was teaching her hands-on healing because she's not grounded. So she doesn't know how to put things together from a business perspective as a potential practitioner.
Right.
So I'm sitting at the table, and suddenly, while I was trying to hold my knife and fork, I felt a hand on my hand. And I thought, okay, who the hell is this? And then I suddenly thought about it in my brain, and I thought, oh, it's you. Meaning, I felt it was my father. But I wasn't particularly kind about it. It was like, I'm irritated because I'm having lunch and I'm working. Why are you here? Anyway, she looked at me in a strange way, and she said, do you know who's holding your hand? And I looked. I said, you tell me. I wasn't going to tell her. You tell me. Your father? And I just said to her, well, how do you think it's my father? She said, because he's just gone and he's come in. There's some, call it apologies. He's feeling remorseful. I go, really? Yep. Anyway, he hung around for a few days, and I thought about it, and then he went. But it was very interesting. So what I'm going to say to you is, you asked me about the other side. I believe that when there are unresolved issues for an individual who needs to go back to source, that they are looking for forgiveness. And so it's very important before you pass that you do clear unresolved connections in your energy field, because it can prevent you from leaving the body completely. If that makes sense to you.
Okay, sure. I've heard rumors that sometimes people have a hard time getting out of
Hard
their
time
body.
leaving your body because you've got someone saying, listen, you little what's it, why did you disappear? Come here, I want to speak to you. So yeah, it was very interesting because I hadn't told this woman anything at all. She told me who it was. She said, there's a man. Is it? I think it's this who it is. And I looked at her and I thought, what the hell? She wasn't a young woman, by the way. She's in her mid-50s. So, we're not talking some young little upstart woman. She wasn't. She's a, mature woman. That was interesting.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it, really.
All right. Well, you're the first person I've interviewed for my podcast, and I think if the other people are as interesting as you, it should go pretty good. You did a great job.
Oh, well, I hope so.
Telling all your stories. Sounds like you've had a very interesting life, and sounds like you're successful at doing attachment removals. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was shown. I've had some great. I think if you have good teachers who show you how to do it and what to do, and the material is great, then that's all you need. Anybody can do it. It's just about, I think, the mental willingness to tackle it. I mean, I don't think that I stepped into this role by coincidence. This is my destiny. I mean, I couldn't get away from this. This work has chased me all my life. You know what I mean? It's not something that I went out to seek. It found me and it kept presenting. I can't ignore it.
Well, I do appreciate your being my first person to interview, because
Okay.
you've been great. You did. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I hope we get to speak again. And I wish you the best of luck with your business and all your healings, and maybe I'll be your client one day.
Yeah, well, you have to experience virtual because it is very interesting. As I said, if it hadn't been for COVID, I wouldn't have explored how to. I wanted to actually give people a real special treatment. You know what I mean? As if they could still come to me, as opposed to we weren't allowed to. And actually, it really was amazing. So thank you, COVID. I wouldn't have done it otherwise, you know? There's always a silver lining to something, you know, that's like you think, oh God, you know, whenever there's something bad, there's always something good out of it. And I think that's what I've made the most of, is that I've learnt a bit more about quantum physics because I had to perform and, you know, offer my students something. And it was more to support them than it was actually because I was seeking to do it. I just thought, well, let's try it. And I tried it with a few of my students, and I said, okay, let's get on and see how this works. And with the help of a couple of them, we got it sorted.
Well, I've had a couple different people ask me to do it, do hypnotherapy over the web, and I've been kind of reluctant to do it because, you know, it's just not, you know, I just have doubts about whether it's something that is possible or the best thing to do, you know, whether it should be done or not. Sounds like your since yours work, maybe that will work also. If I
It
go
would, it will. It's just about the grounding at the end. You've got to be really mindful about that because obviously you can't just leave them in an altered state of mind. It just isn't okay. So I think with the virtuals, you do have to be very mindful about how you close off.
Well, I figured, you know, if you leave them in that state, they're just going to fall asleep, right? And
Yeah, they
eventually,
will. But you know what the problem is? What happens if they wake up in the middle of the night and they fall down the stairs or break? You know what I mean? You've got to make sure. And that's why I never leave them in their bed sleeping. I'm sorry, I can't. I wake them up, make sure they drink some water. I know it's cruel, but you've got to be kind to be cruel. Or, yeah,
so
cruel, kind.
so you just yell at them loud over the.
No, I ground them. I ground them as if I was doing a proper treatment. They can feel me when I'm working down their legs and their arms and pulling the energy. They feel me. It's tactile. I had a woman, one of my students, she was complaining that she wasn't feeling well, tired, and what really made me realize that she had a problem was that she said she couldn't ground. And I thought, well, I've initiated you into the order of Melchizedek. So how the hell can you tell me that you can't be grounded? Now, for some reason, she ended up, it was maybe because her daughter got COVID, but she ended up getting an entity on her that was interfering. So I was going to do a workshop with her. And I said, okay, when I do the workshop, I will also do a clearing with you. So I did this clearing with her, and you know what happened to her while I was doing this entity clearing? She got slapped round the face. This thing literally slapped her, and her whole face went flying. So that's why I have the video camera right on. I need to watch and see everything that's happening during that virtual treatment. And she, at the end of it, said, God, what happened there? Something slapped me. I said, yes, they did. Anyway, after that treatment, everything was just fine. She was grounded, sorted.
So the entity was removed.
Yep, gone. And she's got now a flourishing business. She does healing and flower arrangements, stunning ones, beautiful. And she's flourishing. So entity has to go, can't hang around, and that was what was stopping her. You can't have a balanced life, a successful life, if you've got entities feeding off your energy field. Simply can't do it.
I guess I have, now that we're getting into this, I guess I do have one question, one or two other questions. So,
Yep.
do you remember, did I tell you about what I was hoping to do in the future as far as people putting their hand on my head and experiencing the energy of my attachment, and having that video recorded, and then having people see this recording of, like a crowd of people, each putting their hand on my head, and then seeing if they can feel it, the energy that's there or not, and then recording that whole thing and see if they have reaction. If somebody puts their hand on my head and they can feel the energy of the attaching spirit, they're going to probably show a facial reaction, or maybe they won't, I don't know. But in the end, I figured I would, even if they don't, I would just like be in a crowd and have that happen, and then afterwards ask how many people felt something, how many people didn't feel something, and that sort of thing. And it's all on video, right? And eventually it goes on YouTube, and having people see that sort of thing over and over, to where, I mean, my hope is to make it so that society as a whole starts understanding reality as you and I do, that most people have attaching spirits, to where we can get to a point where removing them is that where, like, we develop the technology to, for instance, I'll give you an example. You understand that infrared can see spirits, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so if somebody has a zero lux infrared camera and they're in a place where there's spirits, they can see those spirits with that camera, right? So
Yep.
if we push the technology forward to where somebody develops a technology where they can see the attached spirits on people, and
Yep.
then we come up with some techniques like you already use, or other techniques where the average Joe can remove attaching spirits.
Yeah,
right?
sorry. I'm just plugging in because my battery's dropping, so I just need to plug you in.
But you can hear what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying.
So if
But
society,
I have a question to you, is that if you've got an attachment, which sounds like what you're saying to me, yes?
two of them.
Well, why the hell don't you have them removed? Why do you want to keep them?
Well, I just told you, because I want to prove to the world that attaching spirits exist. But do you think that that's a dream that might make a difference? I mean,
Well, all I'm going to say is it's not going to make a difference to your life. Your life's going to be very difficult if you're going to be walking around with an attachment in it. And this is what I'm saying to you, is that if you've got an attachment on you, you should have it removed. Because to me, if you're going to sit with an entity of sitting in your energy field, it's going to really detract from your life's experience. And I mean, you don't have to prove anything, in my opinion, that I mean, I wouldn't want to keep an entity in my field just to prove that there are entities.
Well, what if the world...
That's sacrificing your life in this moment of having quite a traumatic life. You could have a really enriched life rather than a traumatic life if you decide to get rid of it. Remember what I said to you is about people. I can remove entities, but if they don't change their life and clean out things, then it's going to come back. So now you're telling me that you kind of consciously decided that you kind of want to do an experiment, and you're prepared to sacrifice your body, your energy field, in order to do it.
Well, okay, so the hope was to make society as a whole like you and me, where society understands that these things are real, that that if you understand like I do, that attaching spirits cause war, crime, terrorism, murder, suicide.
Yeah, it
insanity.
changes people. It affects their energy system. It will affect you. It'll affect the harmony in your home and your life.
Right.
Definitely.
Well, what if the whole world all of a sudden understood that as a whole and decided that everybody, that society is so messed up because of these things, and that they want to make that like a standard part of society. I heard the rumor a long time ago that when you pass on, they take you to a place and they clean off your attachments, right? So what if we made it so that in this world they did that before you died rather than after you died, where it became a standard part of society?
Well, it can become a standard part of society, but what I was going to say to you is essentially, in order to do that, we have to sort out our lifestyle. We have to actually, what's the word? We've got to, I'm in my healing room at the moment. It's just easier. I've plugged you in. What I was going to say to you is that it's much easier to have that experience and clean people up while they're alive. But the only thing is they've got to clean up their lifestyle. Can't just, what's the word? Say to people, well, we're going to clean you out. They've got to also, it's about lifestyle. One of the things I do with my clients, and if I look here on this, I don't know which form it is about their lifestyle. Okay, general questions, lifestyle. So I ask simple questions about their ability to relax, their sleeping patterns, their hobbies, whether they exercise, whether they eat regularly. All these things are really pertinent. I mean, there's not a lot in it, but it really means that they are actually taking responsibility for their life. Now, with entities, if they're not doing any of that stuff, it doesn't matter whether we remove them or not, they can recreate that grounding. It's like, when you make compost and you put all the, I was just going to say, if you don't clean something up, you're going to go on getting fungal infection, yes? Or if you don't, like you get mildew in the bathroom, but if you clean up the bathroom, you won't get mildew. So it's a little bit like that with the entities. I was equating mildew as like an entity.
Well, so I understand everything you're saying, and I'm not denying that lifestyles have to change and that has to be a part of it. All I'm wanting to do is get to a point where society as a whole starts recognizing that attaching spirits are the causes of war, terrorism, crime, suicide, mental illness, all these things. And if society comes to an understanding that attaching spirits cause all these things, then society as a whole can start moving towards the direction of dealing with these issues as a whole, not just people like you, 1% or 2% or 3% healers, but if it were like an everyday understanding.
Yeah, but you're trying to think about the ideal world, and the problem is we've got greedy governments who are selling lots and lots of things. Drugs, I mean, one of the drugs, there's a lovely, I'm trying to think of him as a psychiatrist, and he was given a particular drug. He suffered from depression, anxiety. He was given something. I'm trying to think of his name now. He's a Canadian guy, and he's got this medication. Now, about 4 years ago, for some reason, I don't know why, I think it was something I came back from one of the countries because I go traveling, and I don't know why, but I think I got ill. So they gave me this medication and I was allergic to it, and I had an out-of-body experience, and I had to get the ambulance in to get me back into my body. Now, the interesting thing was, it was diazepam, that was right, and I wrote on the box, suicide kit. And I had to remember it because I needed to know that when I open that box, that I know that if I take that, I'm going to be gone. That's what I'm talking about, the drugs. So what I'm saying to you is that we have to take responsibility, individuals, of what is good for us and what isn't good for us. We can't depend on our government to have our welfare because they've got ulterior motives. We've got companies who are on a profit margin. Pharmaceutical companies, they want profit. Yeah? They don't want healing. because healers don't sell product as such. So the more people we heal, the less profit the pharmaceutical company, because they don't need the drugs. I had a student who I taught on and off for the last, I suppose, 12 years. She came to me. Now, she was a nurse trained in the NHS, and she had a husband who was a doctor, German doctor, but very intelligent man, and they had a cancer clinic. They got divorced and she got remarried, etc. And I was teaching her Terra May. But what happened was that she had a son. She had 3 sons, actually, all from different husbands. But the one son who suffers from it wasn't spina bifida, but it was something like that, a cerebral palsy, and couldn't walk. And he was being bullied and molested at the school he went to, okay? And it pushed her over the edge. And she ended up having a complete breakdown. This woman, who was an intelligent woman, who was a nurse, yes, and really bright, ended up, and her life is over. She's dead, really. As far as I'm concerned, she's dead. I don't know why they don't just put a bullet through her brain, because that's where she's at. You know what they do? They give her an injection once a month. She just sleeps. She doesn't see her kids. She doesn't see her husband. She just sleeps all day and goes for an injection once a month. And her brother looks after her and her mother tries to look after her. This was a woman I knew who was intelligent and could have done a whole lot. So what I'm saying to you is the system is antiquated. It doesn't serve purpose. They just want to make profit. It's far easier to just make profit and drug them up than to resolve them, you know, to remove it.
Well, yeah, I understand the system is messed up. That's part of the problem. And
so I'm just wondering why you want to sacrifice your physical body to prove something. Is this something that you've consciously...
I want to change the world.
Yeah, you can, but I was just going to say that why don't you, when you do your hypnotherapy, get people to, you know, make them feel great. I know you can change the world, but by just making them feel great and healing them. I mean, what did Jesus do? For goodness sake, he used to remove Beelzebub, which is exactly what you're talking about. Yeah? Darkness.
Well, yeah.
But you're sacrificing your body for it. I personally wouldn't do what you're doing, what you want to do, because I think that you could still achieve it, but without being in the dark. Because you're basically leaving it in your auric field and saying whatever. I mean, okay, calm it, sure, get rid of it. But I don't know, there's something here as well that I've got to tell you. If you're going to get people to feel this stripping energy in your auric field, remember that dark energies are transferable. So by you getting those other people involved, and they're not grounded and they're not aware, I mean, I'd probably be all right because I could just kick it and tell it to piss off and go to the light. But I'm telling you that the average Joe soap is vulnerable, and you do not transfer dark energies into somebody who's just connecting to your auric field, because you're exposing them to the dark.
But here's the thing, I don't think my attaching spirits are going to jump off me and go to them. I think they're staying where they're at. So they could feel it and still be okay, because my attaching spirits are not going anywhere. They're staying where they're at. And, you know, so from that perspective, I don't see it as a big deal. But I'm just wanting society as a whole to make the big changes that need to be made. If people as a society, we come to understand that attaching spirits are real, not just a healer here and there, the small percentage like you and me, it's not enough. I want to change. I want everybody to know this is real, so that we can move everybody's attaching spirits and do it as a normal part of society, where it's like high school or kindergarten or college. It's a standard part of society that we will see if you have attachments. Oh, you got them. We're going to remove them. You have to change this. You have to change your lifestyle. You know, it's like the law. It's something that becomes a standard part of society to remove attaching spirits before you move on, to fix up society, stop having all these issues like war, terrorism, crime, mental illness, suicide, uh, insanity. All these things can be solved if society comes to an understanding that this is a real phenomenon that it as a whole needs to deal with. So I'm trying to fix the whole world by proving this exists.
Well, it's, you see, I don't think you have to prove it, because when people come to you and they aren't feeling well, that is because generally, if you've got a parasite on you or any kind of energy, your life is not in alignment. Okay, so there are things that are going to be really difficult for you. I've written a few things on my Instagram blogs just about some of the simple things about, you know, how parasites affect you. But I don't know if by sacrificing your own life and your body and your experience, which would also fit in with your wife's experience, of whether that is really worth it, and are you really going to get the end result?
Well, I don't know if society is going to take note, if they're going to realize, hey, this is real. I'm not predicting the future.
Well, like for my student who sorted out that woman. Now, that woman who had a trauma had been raped as a young girl. Okay, so normally people who've had experience of extreme irregularities and trauma in their early childhood years, particularly rape or molestation, pedophilia. I've actually met a few people, and the impact that that has on the subconscious mind will have that fear factor. The once you're in a fear factor mode, as soon as you've got fear in you, in your energy field, that's the moment that darkness can attach. If that makes sense. Am I making sense? Yeah.
It's just one more way. You know, I got mine through smoking. I stayed high morning, noon, and night for 18 years. That's how I got mine. My wife got hers through Ouija board. I guess fear is just one of the hundreds, if not thousands, of ways you can get an attachment. But everybody's got them, and society needs to recognize that they are the cause of society's problems. And we need to, as a society, come together and make a change as a whole.
Well, you could even where if you're in America, I mean, you could train in Terame if you wanted. You'd get all the training of all of what you would need to remove stuff. I just think that I don't know. I'm not sure if by doing what you're doing or the way your approach you're doing is going to, at the end of the day, give you the result that you're looking for. I just don't know. I mean, you could, if you did your marketing correctly and people, if you know all the symptoms of what you would be showing and displaying if you had an attachment, you could market it in another way and then just do treatments and just pull all this stuff out from people. You know what I'm saying? Rather than, oh, well, we've got it, it's a matter of course. Because people recognize when they're not feeling well, oh, well, how do I get rid of this? Like my student said to me, she was ungrounded. She was feeling depressed. Things weren't going right. She was falling over things. And I knew immediately what was the problem. And as true as Gamut, when I moved this thing, it slapped around the flipping face. So what I'm saying to you is that it's not so much about saying, oh, well, we're going to remove entities and attachments. It's more about what are your symptoms? Okay, well, I'm going to give you a hypnotherapy treatment and I'm going to remove your headache for you. They don't need to know it's an entity at that stage. But I just think the way you're going is, I don't know, it's sacrificing your life. And I don't know if that's such a clever thing to do, really. But
I,
you know, I'm just telling you how I see what you've been explaining, because I didn't know this is what you were doing. I mean, it's just my opinion. I mean, you are very welcome to disagree with what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but from what I've experienced, what I've seen, I don't know if it's clever to say, well, I've got this thing living in my energy field, and let everybody touch it and feel it, because these energies, I just want to say, are transferable, and there are many more of them. And what I'm just saying is that I don't know if that's the way to do it in order to prove, you know, let's prove.
well, what if somebody developed the technology? I was explaining this to somebody. I thought it was you, but maybe it was somebody else. I was telling them, I was hoping to get somebody to develop technology to see attaching spirits, just like we can see spirits with the zero lux infrared. And they mentioned that they knew of NASA had developed a camera that could actually already see attaching spirits. And I don't know, I haven't really tracked that down yet. But, I would just thought that that's another part of what I'm trying to do, is wanting to develop technology that can see attaching spirits, so that we can scientifically prove that attaching spirits are real. And then,
I mean, like, for instance, when I see someone who's got not feeling great, okay, and then I do a clearing progress. I didn't have a recording camera like with a Skype, so maybe I'll do it on Skype and then I can record it. But I didn't have the recording, but she literally got slapped. So that would be proof, I would assume. That's what you're needing to do. But I wouldn't leave those things in your auric field, because, well, it's just, you could have so much more if you don't have it in your life. I don't know. It's obviously your choice. Sorry. I'm speaking like a healer rather than you're wanting a sort of a scientific, let's prove and let's do the experiment. But I just,
no, it's more than that.
It's kind of an experiment.
It's not just that. Okay, so I just think that if society as a whole understands this phenomena, that not that it's a religion, or that it's a possibility, or that it's just something I'm telling them, or all these are just stories. They don't really prove anything. And without proof, people don't make changes, and without changes, the world stays the same. And I want to change it all. And it's kind of a grandiose goal, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. I mean, you can think about, I'm going to have to go now, but what I'm just going to say to you is that you can think about what I've had to say. I hope that maybe you've learned a few different things that I've mentioned just from the work that I work with, because I've talked about a whole lot of different things. But as I'm sort of, I suppose on the final kind of leaving note, is that what you told me you're actually setting out, because now I fully understand kind of what you're trying to do, is that you're sacrificing yourself for some idea that you think you'll be able to prove it. And maybe you will prove it, and maybe it's fine. But you also have to be mindful, because in the fact that you're bringing other people into your field, and you've got this energy in your field, and you know that it's an attachment or an entity, you do have to be mindful about other people coming into that, because it may I don't know how that works in your hypnotherapy classes and that. I'm not really sure, but from what I've seen from experience, the moment something is dark and the darkness comes into the light, there's a reaction. It's like repelling. Oh, I was interviewed in a radio program about a month ago on my sister-in-law's radio program in Johannesburg. And she has never forgotten this, and I actually forgot to tell you about it. She was in a house. This was in about 98, and I went to visit her. I'd been initiated into Reiki by then, and I was in her kitchen, and there was an entity in her house. This energy, basically, and she hasn't forgotten it because it came up on a radio program because the listeners wanted to know about it. And this entity literally threw her, and she's a big woman. She's probably 3 times my size. So I'm not saying, small woman. She got chucked from right across the kitchen, and I got slammed up against the stove, and we literally got pushed apart, like when the battery, the plus and the minus, or the gravity, when you've got the magnetic grill. So it was just literally repelled. The 2 of us got chucked, and this energy, we could feel it, pushed us with such force. I hit my head on the cupboard. I can't remember what she clobbered. I think she fell into the chair, but we literally, the 2 of us got pushed. Now, I forgot to tell you about it, but just because I was thinking of radio programs, and I just remembered that, Mandy brought it up when she interviewed me the other day.
So
it's very interesting because she hasn't forgotten that. So
So
all
what
I'm saying to you is that if you bring in light workers who might have that, or someone who's, got, I don't know, just light or ungrounded, all I'm saying is as soon as you bring light into darkness, there could be that reaction of repelling, and you have to be careful.
So what do you think that entity was, why it was there, and why
I
was
think there was a problem with the house. I think that there was an entity in that house. And I also know, because my sister-in-law was quite a male-dominated woman, is that she's quite angry. I'd just been initiated. So with my new light energy and the anger would bring it out. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I know the moment you bring in light into darkness, there's going to be a reaction. And because I'd walked in with all my lightness and there was all this anger, and then the house was a problem, yeah, it happened, definitely. And as the years have gone by, I mean, this is quite some time ago. We're talking here now, what are we, 22 years ago. So, it was a while ago. I think I'd had my level 3 initiation done. I've already been there. So, yeah, it was just a, different frequency. But anyway.
So are your rates on your website? What you charge?
Yeah, it is. It's up to date.
Okay, so make sure that if somebody went to your website, they would know how much you charge. And
yeah.
Give your website one more time before we go.
Yeah, it's www.yourhandscanheal.co.uk.
Victoria Gosher, I really appreciate you being here, letting me interview you, and all your advice and your wisdom. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure being able to talk to you, and hopefully you've learned a few things. And let me know how you get on.
Well, I'm going to post your this video on my YouTube. You'll be the first one, and I'll let you know where it's at. So you can point people if somebody says, "What do you do?" You can just say, "Go watch this video."
Yeah. Well, yes, indeed. Yeah, it just makes a difference. It just, what it is. It's about transforming people's lives. If people are having difficult lives, just bring them into alignment, clear them out, and it's not difficult. It really isn't, and it can just really make a massive difference.
It's been a pleasure. You have a good day.
And you. All right.
Thank you again.
Okay. Bye, Charles.
Bye-bye.